And joining us now by phone, Andy McCarthy, former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, to discuss the federal government's weak response to the actual violence that's taking place. Andy, welcome back to the program.
Tony, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I don't know if you caught that whole interview with Jim or not, but the state of New York actually now, he didn't go into great detail, but they're investigating him because Hochul passed a law saying you're not a real clinic unless you're doing abortions. And so instead of protecting him and investigating the people that firebombed his clinic, they're harassing him.
Yeah, well, I think if people don't have resort to the federal courts in these blue states where abortion is going to be protected more than the rights of people who complain about abortion, then sadly those people are not going to get satisfaction, at least under this current regime. I wish I had better news for you than that. I'm just trying to be real about it.
Well, I think the data bears that out. I mean, as we're looking at I think I haven't tabulated the exact percentage, but the vast majority of these attacks, the 60 plus that have, or nearly 60 that have taken place, have been in blue states because state and local officials are not enforcing the law. So that brings me, Andy, to you got to get to the federal courts. Well, you got to have federal officials that are willing to investigate, and so far, the Biden administration has been very slow to even call out this violence as being over the top and unacceptable.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I think they've not only been slow, we've had 7 weeks, I think now, that we've been calling for the enforcement of a very straightforward law that says you can't protest outside the homes of Supreme Court justices. And the Biden administration not only won't enforce the law, they're basically conning people with this line that as long as people stay on the right side of, the violence line, that those protesters are immune because they're engaging in First Amendment protected activity. As you're pointing out, Tony, they are obviously not staying on the right side of the violence divide if we look at it as an overall matter. But even with respect to the Supreme Court justices, violence is not our line with respect to court proceedings. You're not allowed to try to influence judges. The judges are not the judiciary is not a political body. We're not supposed to be subjecting them to political pressure. They're supposed to decide cases according to what the rule of law says. So, they won't even enforce that law for the protection of high-level government officials. So obviously they're not tripping over themselves to protect ordinary people.
So how do we make the government do its job? I mean, how do you make the Biden administration actually enforce the law? Is there a check and balance? Is there a way to do that?
Well, I think there's no quick fix, unfortunately. You can file federal civil rights claims, which would then have to make their way through the courts. That's a difficult row to hoe. I think the other thing is obviously political accountability. And unfortunately, right now, the Republican side, I'm not trying to turn this into a partisan thing, but it simply is one. If you want to have real oversight, a Democrat-controlled Congress is not going to do real oversight over a Democrat-controlled administration's failure to enforce the law. So we're in very dire straits right now, especially if the Justice Department, as I suspect, is tying the hands of the FBI, and I suspect that since the FBI is clearly not enforcing the law to protect the Supreme Court justices, it's got to be because the Justice Department has told them not to do that. I think that sets the kind of tone for enforcement, or I should say non-enforcement, that's the climate we're in.
So, Andy McCarthy, let me step back and maybe have a broader discussion here. As a former Assistant U.S. Attorney, you know that our system of government works when people obey the law. I mean, it only works if people obey the law. We're now entering a period where when you have government officials that are flaunting the law, and this isn't the first time, but it's become very pronounced. I mean, our whole republic teeters when we get to this point where it's basically everybody does what's right in their own eyes.
I think that's exactly right. I think that people don't realize the dangerous position that we're trending toward. And I think, Tony, when I go around the country to speak about various different things, I've spoken about the issues we're talking about today, but this comes up in so many different iterations. What has people in the country really angry is the notion that we have a two-tiered justice system, that if you're a connected person, if you are associated with basically the progressive establishment, if you're a member of it or somehow seen as a group that identifies as part of that camp, you get one quality of justice. And if you are an ordinary person, or even worse, perceived as being in the adversary camp, you get a very different quality of justice. And I think if the American people, having worked in the legal system for a very long time, I think what makes our legal system succeed and therefore bolsters the rule of law and allows us to have a flourishing society is general acceptance of the notion that we have equal protection of the law, that everybody gets a fair shake and the same fair shake in the system. And if that's gone, then you don't have the rule of law anymore. If people don't think the outcomes in our system are legitimate, then they're going to reject the system. And then you lose the rule of law, and then you lose everything that allows us to have an orderly, flourishing society. So I quite agree that I think a lot of times when people are trying to achieve their immediate political objectives, they're missing the boat on, just how much we are teetering on the brink of losing something that's so fundamental.
Yeah, and again, not that this was the first time, but it's been happening, and I've spoken out in very strongly against what happened January the 6th, but I think that was a byproduct of this. When people are frustrated and they feel like there is a two-tiered system, that they feel like the system doesn't work, they do irrational things. And that's what concerns me going forward. If we do not have government officials in both parties that will uphold the law and enforce it equally. Andy McCarthy, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today on Washington Watch.
Thanks so much, Tony.